All right. Well, happy International Human Rights Day, everyone. My name is Angela Phelps White, and I am the Executive Director of the Ohio Civil Rights Commission and the Regional Representative for the Midwest region of IORA. And I will be your moderator today. We are proud to present the first quarterly membership engagement activity titled Creating a Human Rights Culture, Here Today, Here to Stay. Celebrating International Human Rights Day offers the opportunity to remember to protect and to promote the fundamental rights and freedoms inherent in all people. Human rights are rights we simply have, simply because we're human, such as the right to food, education, work, health, and liberty. It's our entitlement as human beings. Eleanor Roosevelt was not only the longest serving First Lady, but she was a longtime delegate of the United Nations and a strong advocate for human rights. The statement before you was made in March of 1958 at the United Nations, and this is known as the Great Question Speech. And she said, "Where after do human rights begin? In small places close to home? So close and so small that they cannot be seen on any map of the world. Yet they are the world of the individual person, the neighborhood he lives in, the school or college he attends, the factory, farm, or office where he works. Such are the places where every man, woman, and child seeks equal justice, equal opportunity, equal dignity, without discrimination. Unless these rights have meaning there, they have little meaning anywhere. Without concerted citizen action to uphold them close to home, we shall look in vain for progress in the larger world." Basically, she is telling us that human rights begin at home and in those places we frequent every day. We must work collectively to protect human rights in small places. And if we do that, then we can see progress in the larger world. So before we commence our program, we have some housekeeping matters to address. First, for closed caption, please go to the bottom of your screen, click More, then click Caption, and then click Show Captions. Secondly, there will be a survey sent to you at the end of this presentation. Please complete it and submit it. We want to know what you think of today's program. So today we have a panel of incredible people who will raise your awareness and offer the opportunity for you to get involved in advancing and protecting fundamental human rights and freedoms for all individuals. So our panelists are Robin Toma, IOHRA Immediate Past President, Dr. Elisa Warren, currently our IOHRA President, Robert Corbisier, Alaska State Commission for Human Rights, Joanne Kamuth Ward, New York City Commission on Human Rights, and Larry Krasner, District Attorney for the City of Philadelphia, and Jamil Dakwar, American Civil Liberties Union. So let's start out with our first panelist, Dr. Elisa Warren. She is not only the president of IOHRA, but she is also the executive director of the Missouri Commission on Human Rights. Dr. Warren?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Angela. Can you hear me okay? I was told I was okay. I got a thumbs up. Thank you so much, Angela, representing the mighty Midwest. That's also my region. So thank you so much for that introduction. And as she said, I'm Dr. Elisa Warren, and I proudly serve as the president of the International Association of Official Human Rights Agencies. And thank you all for joining us today. As some of you may already know, IOHRA is a leading organization for human rights professional leadership within state and local government in America. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit, 501c3 organization, and our member agencies serve nearly 250 million people across their respective jurisdictions. So these agencies are statutorily responsible for enforcing human rights laws and work to prevent discrimination, bias, and hate nationwide. Our mission is to support this work by offering opportunities to unite, educate, and strengthen state and local government human rights organizations, very much like this convening today. So I'm very happy to be here with you. Since our founding over 75 years ago in 1949, IAOHRA has stayed committed to engaging in international human rights efforts, including participating in United Nations reviews of the United States Human Rights Record, which we'll talk more about later today. Let me give you a little background about some of that interaction that IAOHRA has participated in over the years as it relates to international human rights. In 2008, at the IAOHRA annual conference in Detroit, a plenary panel was held on international human rights, which led to a partnership between Robin Thoma, we'll hear more from him later, who at that time was an at-large board member, later went on to become our president and is now our immediate past president. But it was a partnership between IAOHRA and the Columbia Law School Human Rights Institute. And this partnership resulted in sessions on international human rights at 15 annual training conferences since then. So we've been at this for a long time. In 2009, IAOHRA members were visited by the independent expert on minority issues for the UN Special Rapporteur on contemporary forms of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance. Then fast forwarding to 2010, IAOHRA was represented in meetings at the White House and as an advisory member of the very first United States government delegation to the Universal Periodic Review session of the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva, Switzerland. That's back in 2010. Then in 2012, IAOHRA participated in proceedings of the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination at the UN offices, the UN Human Rights offices in Geneva. IAOHRA has also participated at an international conference in Bellagio, Italy, that featured the United States, British, Indian, and Australian government human rights officials to consult with U.S. leaders on developing the U.S. National Human Rights Institute, which nearly all advanced countries in the world have, except the United States, which is not something we're proud of, but we continue to work to make that happen in the United States. And as recently as 2023 and just last month in 2025, I had the privilege of representing IAOHRA in Geneva as well to advocate for the establishment of a National Human Rights Institute for the United States and it's the expansion of human rights cities across the U.S. And you're going to hear more about that later today too. What you're seeing on the screen now are some photos of the most latest interaction with IAOHRA members at Geneva just last month. So these are hot off the press photos that you'll see here. There are a number of IAOHRA members here at the UN, as well as our colleague Jamil Dakwar and others that we'll hear more about later. So together, these efforts showcase IAOHRA's long-standing history of sharing our members' expertise and experience on an international setting. It consistently offers recommendations and guidance to improve human rights protections across the country. So of course, IAOHRA's international engagement is just one part of our work. IAOHRA members play a crucial role in promoting human rights across the United States, and our most significant impact comes from the work that our member agencies do every single day, advancing human rights close to home. As Angela said in the quote from Eleanor Roosevelt remarks to the UN back in 1958, we're doing that work right here at home every single day. These human rights commissions and human relations commissions are responsible for promoting and implementing human rights and fighting discrimination within their community. So our member agencies advance human rights in four main ways, such as dispute resolution, policy development, human rights education, and intergroup relations. So this demonstrates the power of each of our members' works from enforcing anti-discrimination laws, shaping policies, and educating our communities. However, despite our vital role in our communities, the voices of these local actors are often absent from international human rights discussions, which we'll hear a little bit more about later, how the United States was actually absent from an opportunity to participate in that global forum. Our member agencies are at the forefront enforcing international human rights standards more than any other institution in the United States. State and local governments put international human rights principles into practice every day. It's in housing, it's in employment, in education, and access to public services. IAOHRA member agencies have a unique perspective on economic, social, and cultural rights because they are directly engaged with their communities. They observe firsthand how systemic discrimination impacts people's daily lives, where access to resources is lacking, and which interventions are working the best in their community. They're the ones that know. They are the boots on the ground. Importantly, state and local governments are often the entities responsible for executing solutions in these areas. Therefore, it's crucial that we participate in United Nations, the establishment of opportunities for local actors to be heard, to collaborate, to ensure that global human rights commitments accurately reflect and address real world conditions. So I've shared a few slides here with you. I do want to invite you to take a look at the YouTube link in the middle of the screen where you'll be able to actually, at a later date, go and watch real time this convening in the middle of the screen here, which was participated by all of the members that will be speaking here today that Angela spoke about, as well as other people. We had opportunities to meet with the Geneva Academy there to talk about some anti-hate programs going on in Los Angeles. We met with ambassadors from various countries and talked to them about possible collaboration with the United States, in spite of the fact that the United States was absent from an opportunity to participate in that official review for the first time in history. So I was very proud to represent IAOHRA at this convening, and I'm very proud of our fellow members that joined us. I'm looking forward to hearing more about that, and I think you're in for a treat. I'm going to turn it over now to the next speaker who's going to share a little bit more. I think it's Jamil Dakwar. Yes, we'll be sharing more, and I'll turn it over to Angela to introduce Jamil. Angela?
Thank you, Dr. Warren, for a wonderful start to this meeting. So you've piqued our curiosity. So now we can't wait to hear what the other panelists have to say and their experiences. I now would like to turn the program over to Jamil Dakwar, who is the Director of Human Rights Program for the American Civil Liberties Unit. Mr. Dakwar?
Thank you, Angela. Thank you, Dr. Warren, for these great opening remarks. Greetings to you all from New York City. I'm Jamil Dakwar, the director of the ACLU Human Rights Program. I'm really honored to be part of this program and the webinar. I've worked and attended many meetings of IAOHRA in over the years, including, by the way, that important meeting that was held in Bellagio in the Lake Como with Robin and others, and Joanne that you'll be hearing from. But it just means that we still have a lot of work to do. In fact, in the past year alone, we just showed us that we have to double our effort and to be even more strategic and more effective in what we do. So in my 5 minutes, and I'm going to turn on now the timer, I'm going to walk you through what we were going to be doing, what we were doing in the last year or so, leading up to the meeting that you just heard from Dr. Warren in Geneva on November 7th. So I'm just going to share also, because I don't like to see my mugshot right in my face. So I'm going to share my screen and share with you some collages that, thanks to my paralegal, Elena, helped put together. So I'm going to share that with you. Hope you don't get distracted with all these, but I'm going to try to walk you through them. So at the beginning of the year, in 2025, this year, civil society organizations had the opportunity, and then exercised the opportunity to submit important information to the United Nations on United States human rights record. And the deadline was April 7th. So we had like few months of coordination, making sure that getting the word out about how to file those submissions. They're very short submissions. Individual submission 5 pages, joint submissions 11 to 11 pages or so.
No.
Okay, I need
The
to make one more trip.
Okay.
Can you
Yeah,
take him back down here one more
Yeah.
time?
I can do that.
um,
And then you can fill me in on.
Yeah,
sorry, there's some
okay.
background noise.
Please mute your microphones. Thank you.
I had to do that. Just that,
Thank you. So we had been very successful in creating a coalition. What I mean, we is really many organizations that came together in the last few years to represent civil society organizations, including with IAOHRA, before the United Nations, other human rights bodies. First, it was the CERD, the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, that reviewed the United States government record under the Treaty on Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination in August 2022. And then in 2023, we were there again before the UN Human Rights Committee that reviewed the US record under the International Covenant on Civil Political Rights. So during those years, we already created civil society, if you wish, coordination bodies and working groups to ensure that we are able to brief these UN human rights bodies. So we adopted the same structure, improved it, invited more civil society organizations from all over the country to join them. And we had over 20 working groups covering all human rights, because the Universal Periodic Review, which was created when the Human Rights Council created in 2006, essentially allows or basically allows the Human Rights Council to review the human rights record of all member states of the United Nations, all 193. And the United States participated in 3 of them. The first one was in 2010, and then the second was 2015 under the Obama administration. And then in 2020, even during the end of the Trump administration, the US government appeared before the Human Rights Council under this process. And this process is more political. That is, governments are the ones that raise the questions, make recommendations, engage with the US delegation. And civil society organizations provide information to the UN Human Rights Office that's usually summarized in a report. So all that information went to the Human Rights Council and in preparation for the US review. However, this is when during the beginning of the Trump administration, the president issued an executive order disengaging the United States from the Human Rights Council. That was in February of 2025, said the United States will not have any business with the Human Rights Council. Obviously, that was a very ideological, politically motivated decision to state the administration's anti-human rights position, that they do not want to be subject, the US, to any engagement, any accountability under any form by the United Nations human rights mechanisms, in particular the Human Rights Council. But we were not sure whether they will show up again in November when the review was scheduled. By August, the United States government, it was clear the US was not submitting its report. The deadline was in early August. And end of August, we learned that the US government officially notified the Human Rights Council that they will not participate in this important human rights review. This was the first time that the country would do such a thing, would essentially say, we're not going to play, we will not going to appear before you, we're not going to exchange any information and share with you what we have. We don't want to hear any criticism of what is happening within our borders and what the US is doing at home and abroad. That is actually a precedent. That is a very troubling precedent that was set. So from there, we started to think about what else we have to do. So you can see from this first slide, the amount of work that was going on in building civil society response to the failure of the US government to show up for its review, to submit the report and to show for the review to evade essentially accountability under international human rights commitments. You see the different important events, including the IAOHRA conference that many of you attended, including, and I had the pleasure to be with you all in Alaska in early October. And this is where actually we decided that it's not enough to make some events in different parts of the country, in New York, in Washington, and virtually, including the People's UPR that you see on the right side of the screen. But it's really important to be actually present in Geneva. And this is when we decided to contact many of the elected officials as well as state and local human rights officials. And in Alaska, at the IAOHRA conference, there was a very important conversation about the importance of IAOHRA leading the way of showing that actually the work that IAOHRA members do on the ground is important enough to showcase to the world, to say that you are doing such an important work in enforcing human rights through your anti-discrimination civil rights laws and ordinances and state laws. And that was an important part of why we thought it would be really great to pull together all the resources to be able to go to Geneva together. So there were civil society and events that you will see in here briefly, and there were also state and local officials side event, and you will be hearing more about them from the following speakers. But I just wanted to share with you from this slide some of the headlines. There was a major press briefing after the state and local officials event that I had the honor to moderate, with participation from some of the speakers that you'll hear from, and the mayor of Chicago, who called directly from the city of Chicago while he was handling an emergency, human rights emergency in his city. So that was a pretty impressive show of force and response, very, very strong response from civil society organizations, as well as some state and local officials. Some of them are elected. And to make this long story short, this is really going to be the beginning. I mean, the Human Rights Council at the end of the day on November 7th adopted a decision on non-cooperation against the United States, basically saying the United States failed to show up for the review. We will be postponing this until next year and encouraging the US and to engage in diplomatic effort to bring the United States back to this process. That may or may not happen next year in November. But meanwhile, there's a lot that's happening on the ground that you will be hearing from, whether it's from the following speakers. And I had the pleasure to work with District Attorney Larry Krasner, who has been at the forefront of being a prosecutor who is also thinking about human rights as he is fulfilling his responsibilities as prosecutor in the city of Philadelphia. I will stop here because I don't want to take more time, and I'm happy to take questions, including on anything that you're seeing on this slide. I will put in the chat so you'll have a chance to see it, and then I'll turn it back to Angela for introducing the next speaker.
Thank you so much, Jamil. That was very enlightening. At this time, I do not see any questions in our chat, and I don't have the full screen to see if there's any hands raised. So who's ever helping us with this, if you could let me know where there's a question, I appreciate it. Okay, so let's go to our next speaker, Larry.
He is not, I think he has a problem with linking. So if you can go to the next speaker and then we can come back to him, if that's okay.
Oh, thank you. Oh, no, that's perfectly
Okay.
fine. Okay, so let's go to our next speaker, Robert Corbusier. He's the Executive Director of Alaska State Commission for Human Rights.
So
Robert?
thank you. So my panel was a little different. It was moderated by the Geneva Academy for International Human Rights and Business. I don't know what the full name of the academy is. At the request of the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, on the role of local and regional governments in enforcing international human rights law, international treaties. And I started off with a lie. I said that I'd never heard of the Universal Periodic Review until just the prior month at the IAOHRA conference that we hosted in Anchorage, and I realized that was a lie because my colleague Robin Toma had told me about the Universal Periodic Review just about a year ago today. But I certainly would have never guessed that I was going to be this directly involved in any way, shape, or form. Um, so and I also never even reviewed any of the international treaties. And I was surprised there really is a role for local and regional governments, even in the four international treaties that the United States has ratified. So I'm just going to kind of summarize and walk you through a little bit about what I said. I started off by talking about the history of racism in Alaska. In the early 1940s, there was a Tlingit couple named Roy and Elizabeth Peratrovich living in Juneau, and they were upset because they'd been denied buying a house in a particular neighborhood. It was pretty common around Juneau to have signs that said no Indians allowed or no Indians or dogs allowed. And Roy and Elizabeth Peratrovich lobbied for the passage of the Anti-Discrimination Act. And finally, in 1945, on the floor of the territorial legislature, one senator exemplified exactly why such a law was needed by announcing, quote, "The races should be kept further apart. Who are these people barely out of savagery who want to associate with us whites with 5,000 years of recorded civilization behind us?" Now, things were a little more loosey-goosey in the territorial legislature, and it wasn't uncommon for members of the public to just stand up from the gallery. And Elizabeth set down her knitting needles and stood up from the gallery and said, "I would not have expected that I, who am barely out of savagery, would have to remind a gentleman with 5,000 years of recorded civilization behind them of our Bill of Rights." And with that, the legislature passed the Anti-Discrimination Act of 1945, which is the first time a state or territory had passed any kind of an anti-discrimination law since the end of Reconstruction after the Civil War. I then talked a little bit about, what ASHR is, but obviously I don't need to tell you guys what we do. I then turned to some of the specific recommendations for the U.S. from the last Universal Periodic Review in 2021. Climate change goals in particular rung true with me, particularly because we just recently had Typhoon Halong that almost completely obliterated a couple of Alaska Native villages in Southwest Alaska. And this was caused by unusually warm ocean temperatures. Sea ice, which used to come in earlier and protect villages from these winter storms, from the floods, has been forming later and later each year and causing more and more erosion in the coastal areas. But I've got to look at it from the Alaska larger interest as well. What about the human right to stay warm? What about the human right to cook food? Alaska is proud of the fact that we just produced our 19th billion barrel of oil, and we continue to stand at the forefront to provide global energy needs with our untapped natural gas reserves. Now, another point is the human right for indigenous populations to be able to control and develop their natural resources. Alaska is unlike most of the other states. Our indigenous people were not entirely moved off of their land, and instead, in the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, Congress formed a series of corporations and created shareholders of the Alaska Natives. And so these corporations control vast surface and subsurface resource areas in the state. For example, the largest zinc mine in the world is near Kotzebue, but it is on indigenous land controlled by the Nano Regional Corporation. Alaska's Inupiat, for the most part, support oil and gas development on their ancestral lands in the Arctic. Now, they also wanted me to talk a little bit about some of the sustainable development goals that the UN has. And we've got examples for that in Alaska as well. The Cook Inlet Regional Incorporated, which is the Native Regional Corporation around Anchorage, has a pretty large wind farm just outside of Anchorage in partnership with our electric utility. There is a village that is doing a hydrokinetic pilot project to obtain power from a river. There's a conglomeration of native corporations that are bringing broadband internet to rural Alaska. There's a kelp harvesting pilot project taking place near Kodiak. And I always love talking about the Point Sophia development in Hoonah, being led by the Village Corporation, which redeveloped an old cannery into a legitimate tourist destination for cruise ships. Another factor in there was environmental racism. Now, at least for my agency, we're not really presented with a lot of environmental racism claims. In fact, most of the recommendations in the Universal Declaration for Human Rights really fall outside of the jurisdiction of my agency and probably the jurisdiction of most of your agencies as well. But I wanted to finish with the things that we did do that do fall into those recommendations. We have explicit authority to review state and local policies that are discriminatory. I recently forced a municipality in Alaska to change a public accommodation law that unlawfully discriminated against disabled Alaskans. I also filed a lawsuit that at least briefly stopped certification of a federal election because we believed the state was carrying it out in a manner that unlawfully discriminated against blind and visually impaired Alaskans. We regularly investigate claims of pay inequities in the workplace. Then one of the questions that came up at the end of my panel was the question about data. I mean, the United States does not have a national human rights agency. And the United Nations, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, is interested in engaging directly with local and regional governments, in particular to get some of the data and understand what is going on. And honestly, we are the agencies that are the boots on the ground in the United States for human rights. So it's like we've all got the data, we've got our FHAP contracts, we've got our FIPA contracts, but that's only capturing, little bits of it. So, I think the next big step for all of us to be able to engage is to figure out how do we have a data repository for all of the data that is not being captured in our reports to the EEOC and to HUD, at least for those of us that have those contracts. And then there are agencies like Robin Thomas who do have neither of those contracts, but are certainly still doing important work on hate crimes. So there needs to be some kind of a mechanism and an intermediary to gather that data, synthesize it, and get it to decision makers and policymakers at the UN as well. Now my chairperson sat on so my panel was moderated by Felix Kirchmeier from the Geneva Academy. It was introduced by the ambassador from Italy, and we had a UN human rights staff, Dr. Warren, a delegate from Belgium, and myself on that panel. My chairperson spoke on the panel moderated by Jamil, and she talked about missing, murdered, and Indigenous persons, which really is an important issue in Alaska. We have almost 20% of our population is Native, and we've cross-border issues and similarities with Canada and missing, murdered, Indigenous people there as well. It is one of the most important public safety initiatives that the current gubernatorial administration has going on right now is to address this, and it is being supported by the Trump administration. We also had a couple of important side meetings. I was able to meet with the Human Rights Commission, High Commissioner's Human Rights Commission staff on Indigenous issues. And quite frankly, they did not know what was going on in Alaska and how we were different and how we have Native corporations. So I was able to actually also take some contact information from them to really put them in touch with some of our Native leaders in Alaska, which reminds me I still need to do that. And then another important meeting that my chair and I participated in was we went and talked directly to the State Department, and we got told, yeah, they had absolutely direct instructions that they were not going to be participating in the Universal Periodic Review. They were not going to be sending anybody to the floor of the General Assembly when the U.S. was up. But they did say, look, there's been some long-standing concerns that the United States has had with the Universal Periodic Review going across administrations. And in particular, the fact that the U.S. has always been very transparent, at least historically, with its human rights record. And, do we really feel good about having nation states like Iran and China criticizing the United States on a human rights record? And regardless of what is going on in Israel right now, they pointed out Israel is an ally of the United States, longstanding ally of the United States. And since the formation of the Human Rights Council, the Human Rights Council has always taken up an annual review of Israel, and that the United States has never felt that was entirely fair. I don't necessarily want to end on that. I did end on my own personal comments in my panel. about being in my 4x4 club, and I'm pretty sure I'm ripping this off from somebody else, a famous president or something like that too. But at one point we had a lot of problems with attendance at our meetings, and one of our members pointed out that the world is run by people who show up at meetings. And here we were at the Universal Periodic Review for the United States, and I could only speak for my agency and for myself, but I was really honored to be in the room and at a meeting at the United Nations. So, thank you.
Thank you, Robert, for sharing your experience in Geneva, as well as the unique work that's being done to promote human rights in Alaska. It was very interesting, and we greatly appreciate you sharing that. Is Mr. Krasner with us yet?
No, unfortunately, we have had a problem getting him the link because it wasn't. He has something with a problem with registering for he couldn't get the link. He registered twice, he couldn't get the link. So I just tried again, but I think we have to move on without him participating,
Okay,
unfortunately.
that's fine. I was just reaching back. So, without further ado, let's hear from Joanne Camus Ward. She is the Deputy Commissioner, Policy and External Affairs in New York City Commission on Human Rights. Joanne?
Thank you. Can you hear me, Angela?
Yes, I can.
Okay, awesome. We could put up Larry's picture and then everyone could look at Larry while I'm speaking. But I guess I didn't put together slides. So we're here together and I'm going to share some remarks. But I really wanted to start with just a good afternoon and happy Human Rights Day to everyone. And a thank you to Dr. Warren, as well as to Angela Phelps-White and Angela Rush, who are both behind the scenes and on screen and have made this happen, as well as Lisa Sims and Diane Clements-Boyd, who are really backbones to all of the work that IAOHRA is doing. So I want to speak for a few minutes today, and I'm going to try and stick to time, about the New York City Commission on Human Rights and our global participation. And I think has already been emphasized in the discussion. This really builds on decades of work that many of your agencies have been doing. And if you're not IAOHRA members, I think you're here because you've also been doing elements of this work to address all forms of discrimination in the country where we live, in the United States. And so I'll just start with a little bit of grounding of our agency, which for 80 years has been working to prevent and respond to discrimination in New York City. And our agency specifically was born out of the need to address racial tension and violence that was erupting, if you're familiar with New York City, or jazz, or many things in Harlem, in the north part of our city. And that those riots and that violence really was a tipping point that forced government to think about disparities in access to basic rights, housing, jobs, which the Dr. Warren mentioned already, and things like sanitation, the very basic services of local government that are often also places of discrimination. So I think the New York City Commission has long viewed our work as consistent, if not directly tied to international human rights principles, and that includes the obligations of the United States that Rob mentioned in human rights treaties, like the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, which was signed and ratified by the federal government in the 90s, and which says explicitly federal, state, and local governments have obligations to prevent discrimination and redress it when it occurs. That's all of our jobs. That's why we show up every day. And some of this work is really under attack through a number of federal policy initiatives. And so, as my colleagues have already stated, it was really important, I think, for agencies like mine and for our commissioner here in New York City to show up and to say, this is the work that we do and this is what we care about. And even if the federal government is not going to show up, we are going to stand for human rights principles. I think an important piece of context for this conversation and future IAOHRA conversations is that the United Nations was set up for nation states. So there is no seat at the UN table for local governments at present. So the work that has been done by IAOHRA and local governments in other parts of the world is really about a strategy that I think we can credit a little bit to Shirley Chisholm. We're making a seat at the table for the level of government that is closest to the people, and I think that's super important. And that is never easy, right? So the New York City Commission on Human Rights had two opportunities to focus on local government engagement in human rights work in 2025. The first, which was a meeting just of local and regional governments. That happened in July. It was a meeting organized by the UN Office of the High Commissioner and an entity called United Cities and Local Governments. And that meeting was really important because it is about shifting the landscape that I just mentioned and creating the seat at the table at the UN for local governments. And a few things that I think are important for this group to know about what happened at that meeting was, one, there's a really concerted effort to create a guidance framework, a kind of playbook for human rights at the local level. They're calling it a human rights cities framework, but I would be remiss if I didn't call in my colleague Robin Toma. County governments and state governments can also be human rights levels of government. So it's called cities, but it's really about local governments in the country where you live. And we can put that guidance framework in the chat, and I think we'll refer back to it. But it's also about the conversation was more about systemically including local and regional governments in the types of reviews that we are talking about. US civil society and IAOHRA were able to make that space in collaboration with many other NGOs. But that space should exist for local governments to be able to step into. And at that city's meeting in July, there were local and regional government networks like IAOHRA from South Korea, from South Africa, from Sweden, right? We are not the only version of local governments coming together to do these things. And I think there's a lot of potential synergies and lessons to be learned. The second way that we showed up to make the connection between this local work that we're all doing and human rights is by participating in the November 7th event that everyone has spoken about already, and folks have shared lovely pictures. I would say, important to note, I had a lot of support from our commissioner. I would say I had lukewarm support from the folks at City Hall that need to approve going to other countries to talk about local work. And that is going to be a hurdle for all of us if this moves forward, right? The conversations are not happening in the United States, they're happening somewhere else. And so to get there, there's a lot of bureaucracy in that. And that's real for IAOHRA to be thinking about. But why is it worth our while, I think, is the point of this conversation and this discussion. In Geneva, we were able to talk about the events Rob discussed, some of the pieces that Jamil talked about and showed slides of. And I want to just mention the thematic issues that I was able to speak about from the perspective of New York City, because I think some of them will resonate with all of you. And I think they're important for us to be thinking about on the UN stage, but also in our work together as IAOHRA. So I talked about two themes, really. One was how the federal government has undercut the work of our agencies in the space of advancing racial justice. And another was how the federal government is attacking a gender spectrum and really trying to foster an idea that there's a gender binary. Both of those efforts are direct attacks on New York City's human rights law and New York City's communities. And I think many of the human rights laws that we all work to defend every day. So I talked about how the federal government is rolling back disparate impact protections. That was through executive orders. It's now through formal rulemaking from the Department of Justice. We talked about efforts to hold back funding from New York City because New York City allows students to use bathrooms consistent with their gender identity. Those are all things that we disagree with. So the second part of what we talked about was what our city is doing to protect the basic rights of people regardless of their racial or gender identity or sexual orientation. So we talked about how there are efforts in New York City to put forward a reparations task force that's ongoing. We have racial equity impact statements. We are not backing down on the understanding that DEI and racial justice are critical parts of democracy. We also talked about New York City litigation challenging the loss of funding based on gender identity. And we at our commission specifically have filed 2 litigations against hospitals that have denied gender affirming care to people. So we were able to both highlight the problem, but also identify local solutions. And I think that is why these fora can be useful. And this work is hyper local, but also there's a lot of solidarity in thinking about cities and the role that cities can play when working together. And that's why I'm so thankful for all of you. Teaser alert, there's opportunities to think about human rights cities and what that means globally, and we'll, I think, have some space to discuss that later today after my colleagues wrap up their remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. Really appreciate you sharing with us some of the topics of discussion that you held in Geneva and the posture of the laws in New York. So that was very interesting. So thank you so much for that. Okay. Certainly last, but definitely not least, is Robin Toma. He is the IAOHRA immediate past president, but he is also the executive director for Los Angeles County Commission on Human Relations. So let's hear from Mr. Toma.
Thank you, Angela, and really appreciate the lovely way that you started us off reading from Eleanor Roosevelt's comments. I also want to thank Dr. Elisa Warren, our president, because without her leadership for this event, it wouldn't have happened. And so, and I think it's also emblematic of her commitment throughout her term as president, her terms as president, that this has been a priority for her. And I think that's so important given our history as well as our name as the International Association of Official Human Rights Agencies. Also, shout out to Angie Rush and Lisa Sims, who, as was mentioned, behind the scenes make this possible. And I do want to give a expression of appreciation for Joanne Kamoff Ward and the New York City HRC, because Joanne has really been not just instrumental in the short history, but really in the long history. Ever since I got involved in this, her agency prior to the New York City Human Rights Commission, the Columbia Law School Human Rights Institute, really was so key in supporting IAOHRA and all of our engagements with the international human rights institutions and mechanisms. So we wouldn't be here without Joanne and her work with Columbia, as well as her current work with New York City. And I do want to say that Rob Corbusier, without him stepping up to lead us and to support the IAOHRA conference in his state of Alaska, in Anchorage, we, as Jamil mentioned, would not have gotten together to talk about international human rights, assess where we are, to feel the urgency of addressing the crisis that was happening in this country around human rights, and getting to the point of actually making the huge commitment of getting to Geneva, Switzerland, and to speak during those critical times and days when the United States abdicated its responsibility and didn't show up to even address the human rights commitments that it has made over the years. And I want to just say that Doreen Lorenz, the Human Rights Chair, was also really supportive, and it was great to have her there as well. And also Diane Clements Boyd, without whom we wouldn't have had the conference. Finally, Jamil, when he reached out and said, and we were talking in Anchorage and said, how do we make this happen? How do we not just lament the fact that the US isn't going to be present in Geneva, but how do we really be there to make a difference. If it wasn't for his initiative, we wouldn't have been in Geneva either. So let me just say that um, ended up being a challenge for me to say, how can LA County step up? And so I crafted a message and reached out to our elected leadership, our county board of supervisors, and asked them, this is what's going on. This is an opportunity for us to be heard. Us as a community that has really felt the brunt of the targeting by the current administration and how our human rights have been at risk and violated. Um, can we be there? Can you all be there? And I was so proud that not only did Holly Mitchell, our county board of supervisors, um, stand up to say, yes, I'm going to be there. And Holly Mitchell, just to give you a sense of her responsibility, represents around 2.5 million people in LA County. We have five supervisors that represent around 10 million people. And so the enormity of her responsibility and the ability on short notice to make time on her calendar to be there really reflects the incredible commitment to defend the human rights of our community. So, her being there was just an incredible opportunity for them to not just hear about LA County, but hear from the elected representatives of our large population and to hear about what we've been experiencing. I have to say that was a watershed moment for IAOHRA in the sense that we have been at many events, but it was so critical that we are there at this time, given what's happening in our country. And I want to say that how that happened is really not just a product of that moment, but really of many years of building and laying the groundwork for that, not just for IAOHRA to make that commitment, but for in LA County as well. And I want to just talk about that in the way that to give you a sense of how we can celebrate Human Rights Day by thinking about the first steps we can take, all of us here. And I want to say that it's incredible that there are 199 now, but it was at 100 participants on this call that obviously care about human rights and making a difference. So what we in LA County have been trying to do for many years is to recognize that um, the number one thing that we have to do is to start to build a human rights culture and awareness. Because even though we all are familiar with the term human rights, most often it's thought of as something that applies outside of the United States, not inside the United States. And as been mentioned by the previous speakers, there is really a core connection between the United States and its local communities and the way that human rights have been addressed globally. So for example, we have sought to include human rights language in our agency's vision, values, mission, and our program description work. Um, so many years ago, we explicitly included human rights in stating what our vision for LA County would be. And even though we're known as the Human Relations Commission, we made it clear that without human rights for every person, that you cannot have truly harmonious human relations. You can have, as in situations with dictatorship, you can have peace in the sense of no one is allowed to do anything out of line. And in those repressive environments, you can have a drop in crime and you can have a forced relationships that are going to be without anything that could be punished by the dictatorship or by the authoritarian government. It's not truly harmonious. And so we stated that in our vision statement and our values and guiding principles. Let me share with you something that I wanted to say that also marks this day for us. And okay, sorry. All right, so I don't know if you can see this, can folks see the headline here? LA County ushers in World Human Rights Day, declaring support for the United States to be held accountable to international human rights principles.
Yep.
What just happened, hot off the press, thanks. What just happened hot off the press yesterday was that our Board of Supervisors passed a motion that was made by Supervisor Holly Mitchell that directed our county to formally send a letter signed by all members of the Board of Supervisors, a unanimous decision, to the United Nations Human Rights Council and to the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights to call on them to hold the United States accountable to international human rights principles. And that is a direct result of our presence in Geneva. Supervisor Mitchell took that initiative, recognizing the importance of our international human rights mechanisms. So that, I think, is something I thought was worth sharing. And this is something that you all can do as well each year or at any opportunity to have your leadership body weigh in on human rights issues. So that's number one. I wanted to share that. The second thing I wanted to talk about is the fact that we have, as a county, realized that the first step in building a human rights culture is just to make sure that we know what our international human rights standards and principles and laws are. And we know that's pretty complex because our international human rights laws have become quite, I think, quite varied in a number of different instruments. And so it can be bewildering to some to know what that's about. So one of the things that we did, and if you just go to our website, you can go to this as well, we created a reference guide for internationally recognized human rights. And this reference guide will actually go through each human right by category. You can see it broken out here by personal, family and home, community, civic and cultural, employment and economic condition, legal, national residence, and specific populations, and then walk through each of the instruments, each treaty, which are actually some which we as a country have signed on to, and other core human rights treaties that we have not signed on to. But all of that is laid out here, and it's available for anyone to download and use, and happy to share it with all of you. But no need to reinvent the wheel. We have created this to help folks know exactly what the source of different human rights are. I also wanted to share something that I think can be useful for folks because in addition to that, we realize that a lot of people in our government don't understand that they're actually doing international human rights work in the sense that they are carrying out functions of government which are really intended to meet and fulfill the rights under different human rights treaties. And so we partnered with some of our local human rights agencies. I should say professors and their programs at different law schools. And we together created this document, A Human Rights Lens on LA County Government. And it really was about looking at what our government departments do and understanding how their different programs actually reflect and implement internationally recognized human rights. And this was important because in doing so, we actually would ask each department head to tell us, is this correct, this description of your program? And they would look at our report and say, yes. And they say, are you in agreement with the way we've talked about it? And they said, yes. So then we got them to realize by looking at that and agreeing with it, that they could see the connection between their everyday work and international human rights. That's important because as we move through our work, including with the supervisors, our elected leadership, they can see how all of our county government is doing this work. And that's an important recognition in being able to move forward and build a human rights culture in our county government. And in fact, this report was cited to in Supervisor Mitchell's press release about the passage of the motion yesterday that led to the letter to the United Nations Human Rights Council and the High Commissioner. And and here you can see that we also have a page on explaining how human rights leads to healthy human relations. So all of these are available on our website, and I wanted to just share that with you so that you can take advantage of that. And lastly, I just wanted to say that what we are seeing in LA County and around the country, the fact that all of you are here, I think should give us hope. And one of the things that is a very specific way in which we should have hope is that just yesterday, a federal judge in California struck down the presidential control of National Guard within our state, and I think that was an important way of protecting our rights as communities to not have the military policing our cities and counties. So that's something I think also hot off the press, worth celebrating. And I'm going to, move later to some of the ways in which we as communities can take action, even in addition to what I've said already. So I'm going to pause there and see maybe perhaps uh, DA Krasner has joined us. But if not, then I guess I'll move on to the call to action. I'll take the silence as no. He hasn't been able to figure out how to join
Robin,
us.
this is Elisa. I do not see the district attorney on. I think there was a problem with the link. So unfortunately, we're going to miss out, but we'll bring him back another time.
Okay. Thank you, Elisa.
Yeah,
All right.
meanwhile, I'm posting in the chat the call for action that District Attorney Krasner issued last month after he came back from Geneva. He also held a press conference with Intention and brought his staff. You can watch it here at this link that I'm going to post right now. He's taking very seriously this effort of kind of bringing human rights home. Like every single official in every jurisdiction has to take seriously their human rights obligations and commitments. It's not just for the federal government. While the federal government is now engaging in assault on international human rights, both at home and abroad, uh, every single state and local official still have international human rights obligations. This may not be obvious or clear or explicit, but that's the kind of thing that I think hopefully IAOHRA will be able to share with members, but also with elected officials. When Larry Krasner was in Geneva and heard about the responsibilities of state and local officials, elected officials on human rights, he said, yeah, of course, that's what we do, and that's where we will have to double down on, and making sure that we are linking the two, the international agreements, treaties, obligations that the United States ratified in particular, to the state and local laws, constitutions, as of course, in addition to the federal constitution. So that's definitely something that we will be continuing to follow up on. But I wanted to share the information that unfortunately he was not able to join us this time. Hopefully, there will be other opportunities to connect with him and maybe with the supervisor Mitchell and others who are interested in bringing the work and this kind of commitment to human rights to the very local level.
Thank you, Jamil. Yes, I'm sure, as you said, this is just the beginning of our work, and not the end of our work. So I'm going to go ahead and shift then to the call to action. So as you can see, many of you, and many of you who may not be on the call, expressed at our last IAOHRA conference in Alaska, interest in becoming a human rights city and county and state government. And so I want to say that the comment made earlier by Joanne, so important to remember that it's not just a good thing to do. It is, and it's important to do, especially now, given the political environment we're in. But it's actually an obligation under not only the International Convention to Eliminate All Forms of Racial Discrimination, which talks about state and local government, but all of our states and local governments are supposed to be following the US Constitution, which specifies that the supreme law of the land is not only the Constitution, but treaties. And so these are treaties signed on by the United States that we need to realize are obligations that apply to our state and local governments. Let me start by saying that that this is really not just coming from us, but this is an initiative coming from our global partners that recognize that in this moment in history, there are governments that are becoming authoritarian or are authoritarian and are therefore not engaging with the global human rights mechanisms and accountability processes that they should be. And so they realize the importance of connecting with state and local governments, what they call regional and local governments. In that vein, the United Nations Human Rights Office just recently released a guidance framework for human rights cities. Also, as I think was put in the chat, there is also a movement of civil society, of nonprofit organizations and activists, human rights activists, who have begun building a network of human rights cities. And I want to just give a shout out to Professor Jackie Smith, who has been a leader in that work as well. So I want to announce at this event that IAOHRA is creating a working group to help you, all our member agencies, to do that, to become a human rights city, county, state government. And the way to think about it is that we want to go deeper into what we can do individually and with our governments, knowing that all of our governments are distinct in their political and cultural makeup, the way they operate, the unique challenges that we each face, and to help us figure out how we can strengthen our local government's commitment to human rights. And I just want to say that this shouldn't be something thought of as another project to take on, but it is really fundamental to what government should be. I think one of the most important roles of any government is to ensure the human rights of every person in their jurisdiction. And I think that's the reason why the Bill of Rights was enacted so soon after the Constitution was approved for our country. And it's the reason why so many of our local governments do have programs and operations which are protecting the basic human rights of every person, but may not realize that. So what I want to do is to invite all of you to join us by emailing us at that email address you see on the screen, iaohra@iaohra.org. Can't be simpler than that. And to say that that's going to be a place where we can work together to have IAOHRA support the formation of new human rights cities, counties, state governments. And let me just say, it doesn't, to be less daunting, it's not about only about convincing your leadership body to do that. To get there, there are things you can do just within your agency that will be important. As I mentioned, one is really thinking about how to use human rights language to describe what you already do in terms of protecting the basic human rights to employment, to housing, to other public accommodations, other fundamental rights, but using human rights terms and putting that in your website and using it in your brochures and doing it in a way to where people are connecting the fact that civil rights are human rights. And a shout out to the Pittsburgh Human Rights Commission for coming up with that slogan. The other thing I wanted to point out is that we as an organization, IAOHRA, we are in a unique position to lead this. If you look at our history and the linkages with local and regional governments, human rights, civil rights, human relations agencies, we are the agency that really should be leading this effort within the United States in conjunction with so many of our partners like ACLU, like the Human Rights Cities Association, like so many other organizations that care about building a human rights culture in our country. Finally, I want to say that we can link you to many of the resources that currently exist, not only in this country, but internationally, that can help you move forward in this endeavor. And I think that it's amazing that the 199 of you are here today to join us in exploring this important idea of how human rights can not only be an ideal we celebrate that came into being many years ago, but really its time has come and we need to make it a reality in our local communities. So with that, I'm going to stop and turn it back to Angela Phelps-White.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you for sharing LA County's commitment to human rights. I hope that what everyone has heard today from all of our panelists will motivate them to get involved with ensuring that every individual enjoy their human rights to which they are entitled. As Robin said, if you're interested in becoming a human rights city, please email us at IAOHRA.org, and we will be glad to reach out to you. So a reminder, please submit your surveys. I'm going to see if there are any questions that anyone have of either of our panelists. Zara Himani has a question.
Yes,
I
hello.
hope. Hi, what is your question?
First of all, I just wanted to say thank you to IAOHRA and all of the panelists for this great presentation. It's really wonderful to hear about the work that you all are doing. My question is for really any of the panelists. I was just wondering if you all have any ideas about how to advance sort of individual protections using the various rights that have been codified in different places, in different treaties and things like that, how to advance them domestically on an individual level. So, for example, to concretize the question a little bit more, I deal with domestic civil rights housing law. And I had a prior background in international human rights law. I certainly see the connections between international human rights and domestic rights in the area of housing discrimination. But, given that there are a good number of Supreme Court decisions that talk about limiting the reach of international law and international human rights and their enforceability in domestic courts, I was just wondering if any of the panelists have any ideas, given sort of the dire situation of domestic civil rights right now, of what we can do as advocates using perhaps something in international human rights.
Which one of our panelists would like to answer that?
I'm happy to take that one or start
Thank you.
off.
Yeah.
Thank you, Zahra, for this really important question. Historically, you're right. We do not have, under current U.S. law, and largely speaking, there are just exceptions, very few exceptions, but by and large, the United States government, when we ratified our international treaties, the three key treaties that we mentioned earlier in the early 1990s, there was no enabling legislation. There was no implementing legislation that was passed by Congress to create cause of action that would allow people to sue and to file claims directly invoking international human rights treaties that were ratified. So as a matter of international law, and as a matter of constitutional law, treaties that have been ratified are the supreme law of the land, but with the way that they were interpreted by the Supreme Court, it had made it clear that it requires to have enabling legislation in order for a particular treaty to be self-executing and be enforceable in a court of law. Now, of course, there are a few exceptions. What I wanted to answer a question in a different direction. While we don't have acts of Congress that would allow to effectuate our treaty obligations and to file lawsuits on individual claims, that could change in the future, and we should continue to push for that to change. But meanwhile, you can see that state courts are open, and some of them are actually are entertaining certain claims under state courts, state constitutions. Some of them actually have already incorporated international human rights standards. They may not have invoked or specifically or explicitly mentioned international treaties, but they are certain rights that are protected under state constitutions, including economic, social, cultural rights, social economic rights in particular, like the right to education. More recently, for example, in New York State, where I live, we passed an amendment to our constitution to recognize the right to healthy environment, the clean water, healthy environment as a constitutional right. Now, that is important because that would raise the bar in terms of what the responsibilities and obligations of state authorities to protect rights. We have passed the Equal Rights Act. There's a lot of other things that have passed in other states, including on right to health, right to housing, which is more and more being protected and pushed as a human right. And again, in that case, state courts will have to have the chance to be able to litigate those kinds of cases, hear human rights arguments, not just a general persuasive arguments under international practice of human rights, but literally connecting it to state constitutional arguments and claims. So that is something that's growing. I know that, for example, at the ACLU, we have a state litigations initiative that is about 3-4 lawyers that are specifically focusing on thinking about how to bring more and more state court cases because the federal bench, because the federal courts, especially the Supreme Court, are making it much more difficult in general terms, not just on international human rights. I mean, in general, they're really limiting the access to the court, particularly for asserting or for defending and protecting individual rights.
Yeah, I'm just going to build on that a little bit. Thank you for the question. Thank you, Jamil, for the answer. I think there are a couple examples, historic and more recent, about some of the ways to frame issues as human rights issues that can be helpful for local organizing and also legislative purposes at a local or state level, depending on where you live, a huge caveat. But in New York City, for example, some of the advocacy around access to civil counsel in housing court, so guaranteed representation by attorneys, has been based in the human rights framework. There are elements, I think, of the human rights framework that we can look to for local policy and local legislation, right? I mean, Jamil was just mentioning the human right to housing is that it's adequate, affordable, culturally appropriate, and a few other A words. Those are ways, I mean, the power of a human rights assessment, I think, is you're looking at what you have locally and identifying how does it measure up to these globally recognized standards. So it can be a litigation tool, and I wouldn't close the door to that, but I think it can also be a way to frame up some other pieces and to evaluate budgets and where money is going. I think there's a lot of potential in the example from LA County, which is broadly about human rights, but you can have similar things that are more issue specific, where it's taking on an issue using a framework, honestly, that is different than the historical civil rights anti-discrimination framework, because I think we can all recognize that only gets you to a point and doesn't necessarily get to fulfillment of the rights themselves.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Okay, well, hearing or seeing none, at this time, I would like to first thank the panelists for their insightfulness, for the information, and the opportunity that you're offering for others to get involved in this important endeavor. As we all see, our work continues. And so we all must, what they say, boots to the ground and get out there and get this work done and accomplished. Before I turn it over to Dr. Warren to conclude, please remember, submit your surveys because we'd like to know what you think and how we did. So at this time, without further ado, Dr. Warren, would you like to summarize and send us all out on a positive note?
Would definitely like to do that. First of all, thank you so much, Angela, for being such a wonderful moderator and representing the Midwest region so beautifully. Thank you so much for that. I did want to also thank everybody for attending today. This is to be able to, this has been an annual event for IAOHRA to celebrate International Human Rights Day in a variety of ways, but it seems more critical now than ever that we lean into this, work together, and not feel discouraged by the fact that there have been a lot of things at play that would undermine the work that we're doing and that we have been doing for 76 years as an organization, and we will continue to do as our theme said, creating a human rights culture here today and here to stay. We're not going anywhere. We've been here for 76 years. We'll be here for 76 more. And the work that you do at home every day is so critical and so important. But know this, I often sometimes can feel like I'm on an island. You know, you're doing this work and maybe it's not always appreciated or it feels like it's being undermined. And just know this, that you have a home at IAOHRA. You have a group of people that are doing this work, that understand how the critical nature of this work and how we fit into the international puzzle that is humanity. We are, just by the very nature of being human, we have these rights, and Angela mentioned that at the top of our program. And so our work is noble work, it's valuable work, and it's not going anywhere. So I invite you to join IAOHRA, consider signing up for one of the work groups that Robin introduced today to learn more about becoming a human rights city or county or even a state. Also, too, know that we're going to have more quarterly virtual events like this. The Midwest region kind of kicked it off, but the other regions will be hosting events each week. So look for those on our website, or we'll be sending out invitations. Also would just like to add, I think I've got some background noise here. I think somebody, if you could please mute your mic. Thank you so much. It happens. No big deal. But follow us on Facebook, follow us or like us on LinkedIn. Let us know what you're doing in your community, because as we mentioned, human rights starts at home. It's close to home, as Eleanor Roosevelt said so long ago in 1958. This work starts at home, and we are doing that work here at home. So let's kind of lean into this, work together to figure out how to expand the human rights culture in the United States. It was disappointing that the United States was not represented as it should have been at the last convening in Geneva, Switzerland at the UN. But however, IAOHRA was there. We were there. We were represented well by the members, your colleagues here on this panel, and other elected officials, such as Holly Mitchell and Larry Krasner and our friend Jamil Dakwar from ACLU, Joanne Thomas Ward, and myself, Robin Thoma, and then of course Rob Cavicier from Alaska. We were there to represent IAOHRA and let the world know that IAOHRA is still doing the work. We are still holding up the human rights principles in this country. And so while it might seem as though things are being dialed back, just know this, we're not going to let this go away. We're going to continue to do the work with your help, and we can work together to get that done. I invite you to, if you have a chance, go look at the convening. It was listed here. We're on YouTube, so you can go back and watch the actual convening on YouTube. It was listed there in the PowerPoint, and actually, I think we'll probably put this PowerPoint maybe up on our website. I'll have to check on that. Also, too, Rob Caviezel talked a little bit about the importance of data and collecting data and being able to enumerate our work in a way that we can boil it down to facts, you know? And so let's talk about what that looks like in your region and in your community, because that's very important. And Rob spoke to that. What else did I want to share with you? It's just that I'm really proud. I'm really proud of the work that we do every day as an organization and that you do every day. Again, hang with us. Let's continue to do this work together, and reach out to us at IAOHRA@IAOHRA.org if you'd like to email us directly or visit our website at IAOHRA.org to see what's going on. Stay tuned for our next annual conference. We're in the process now of planning that. It's going to be a good one, so you don't want to miss it. Alaska was amazing, thanks to Rob Caviezel and the Alaska Human Rights Commission. So thank you for that. If you missed Alaska, you missed a treat, because it was fantastic. And there'll be another equally amazing conference coming up in the late summer, early fall. So look for that. We want to see you there. Anyway, thank you so much for your time. We are right on time. We've had about 90 minutes with you today, and we appreciate you so much.
Excuse
Thank you.
We have
excuse
one
me,
more. We have one more question. I'm sorry,
yeah,
Dr. Warren.
I had a
Okay.
question regarding
Yeah.
Tibet. Like, do you guys do have a policy on Tibetan human rights? I mean, do you think the administration will be in talks with China for the Tibetan human rights, or?
Can any of our panelists answer that question?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. I mean, I think our ambit is very, very local. So I'm sure many folks on the call have positions about the global issues and human rights in other countries. But as IAOHRA, we don't have a position and have not taken any positions on foreign policies. And I think that's true for most of our agencies. NGOs probably have a different positionality.
Okay, yeah, I was working on that issue, so, you know.
Yeah, I think Jamil unmuted himself.
Yeah,
So
I would say in 1 minute, I know we are running close to the end. Thank you for your question. The problem that this administration is, I'm talking about the Trump administration, that it is trying to weaken international human rights, not just domestically, but also internationally. They have not only cut funding, completely restructured the State Department, they created a new division called national rights, that they believe that this is the new way that they want to offer it to the world. That is not based on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that was created 77 years ago today. So I think to your question, I think this is something that, of course, many international human rights organizations continue to follow what happens in China, in Tibet, for the Rohingya, for the other communities in other parts of China, not just the Tibetan region. But I think that the fundamental problem that we're having is that this administration is really determined to dissolve and to decimate some of the structures and mechanisms and international agreements and treaties that were adopted by watering down, weakening them, creating some alternative frameworks, and all these things that were in the national security strategy that just came out a couple of days ago. So I'm sorry that we are not in a position here to address your question, but I think it's really important to connect between human rights abroad and human rights at home. Although I think the focus, as Joanne said, is for this particular webinar is more about what is happening in the United States. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. We are out of time, but I want Dr. Warren to finish her wrap up.
Thank you so much, and thank you for that question. So I want to just ask you to do me a favor. If you pick up your cell phone and go to your camera mode and look at the screen and take a picture of that QR code and click on that, it's going to take you right to the IAOHRA Facebook page, and then the one underneath it is going to take you right to the IAOHRA LinkedIn page. Please visit that page, like us, connect with us. We want to stay in touch with you. So, I know that's a shameless plug, but a point of privilege, right? Please do lock into us on social media so that we can stay connected. And thank you so much for your time. It is now 3:30. We started on time and we have ended on time. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful holiday season. Be safe. Take care of yourself and your family, and we'll see you next year. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Goodbye.